We will agree with the Republican request not to start negotiations until after the government reopens. All Republicans have to do is say yes to extend current law for 1 year.
So before we start the show, we've got a couple of very important topics to discuss: the government shutdown, Venezuela. We've got Mandani's victory in New York. But before we start talking about these stories, I think it's very important for me to point something out. So this show sometimes is going to seem lopsided, right? It's either going to lean liberal or it's going to lean Republican. But that's all depending on what's going on around the world and what's going on here in the United States. So if the Republicans are jacking things up, it's going to sound like it's leaning towards the liberals. If the liberals are jacking things up, it's going to sound like it's leaning towards Republicans. So just to be clear, I look to keep everything balanced on the show. But if one party is messing up more than the other, then it's not going to sound so balanced, right? So let's talk about the first topic of the day, which is the government shutdown. Now, if you guys remember on one of the previous shows, I spoke about how I blamed the Democrats for the shutdown based on the fact that they were asking for three things that were unrealistic that the Republicans were never going to negotiate, right? One of those was eliminating the Medicaid cuts in the Big Beautiful Bill. The other one was the extension of the ACA subsidies. And then the third one was eliminating the provision in the Big Beautiful Bill that allowed people who were in the country illegally to access government-funded health care. Now, those three things the Republicans were not willing to negotiate. So I was placing the blame squarely on the Democrats for shutting down the government. But I think the tides are shifting a little bit. And the reason I say that is because the Democrats are now willing to put something forward that is a little bit better and a little bit more negotiable. Now, they haven't put it necessarily on paper, but if they are truly willing to negotiate and this is what they have to offer, I think that it's not necessarily a bad deal. So listen to Chuck Schumer talk about what they're proposing.
We will agree with the Republican request not to start negotiations until after the government reopens. All Republicans have to do is say yes to extend current law for 1 year. It makes sense. And since what we're proposing is only a simple extension of current law, the Senate could do this within a few hours.
Now, this sounds like a pretty good deal, right? Just extend the ACA subsidies for another year, negotiate them, over the next course of the year, and then we can decide exactly what funding levels are appropriate, right? Where the money needs to go exactly when it comes to the ACA subsidies. But that's not really what's happening here. Take a listen to this.
Yeah, it's one of the key reasons that we have continued to be able to push back on what Chuck Schumer is trying to be able to peddle. He's saying, hey, let's just do a 1-year extension of these Obamacare subsidies. And the general media gets out there and says, that sounds so reasonable. But what they're really saying is send $40 billion straight to insurance companies that some of them have had between 500 and 1,000% increase in their stock just since the time of Obamacare. So they're saying send all this money to insurance companies and it'll be fine. What the Democrats are not saying is it's pumping money to insurance companies, not to people to be able to help. It's only for about 20 million people, the select group that they have picked. It's not the general population.
So when we hear these refutes of one another, we start thinking about, who's telling the truth? I mean, are the Republicans lying about that? I mean, does this money not go to the consumer? Does it go straight to insurance companies? How does this work exactly? Well, the money does go straight to the insurance companies. And I think that's part of the problem. And that's what the Republicans are looking to negotiate. They prefer that this money be sent to Americans. Now, how that works, that's still up for debate. They've got to figure out exactly how to get this money to the American people. But that's fact. But for those that are still doubting exactly what's going on here and who's right, who's wrong with these ACA subsidies, take a look at this where Chuck Schumer is challenged on the floor and he's asked a simple question.
1 year, people making millions of dollars would still receive these COVID-era subsidies?
The bottom line is the senator from Ohio ignores that 99% of people, you want to hurt people making $10,000, $50,000, $90,000 and hold this up? We can fix what the gentleman said in a negotiation, but don't have people who are every day being hurt by paying thousands of dollars more that they can't afford. I know that the senator from Ohio cares about the billionaires. We care about average working people. I yield the floor.
So just to be clear, Ms. President.
Was recognized.
So just to be clear, what you heard from the minority leader was the following. I just want to recap it for those of you who might have missed. Number one, he acknowledged that the Democrats have actually not put forward a written proposal that people could look at. Number two, he acknowledged that his plan would be to allow millionaires, let me just say that clearly, people making millions of dollars would receive Biden-era COVID Obamacare subsidies. You heard that right. No income cap. I was going to ask him before he stormed out of the room, because evidently he doesn't want to hear any opposing views or actually engage in meaningful negotiation.
So I think what needs to be pointed out is that three things can be true at the same time. First of all, with Senator Langford, he's talking about this money going directly to insurance companies, and that is fact. When it comes to what Senator Schumer was talking about, he's absolutely right as well. The majority of people that receive the ACA subsidies are people that really need them. And the third thing that I said can be true is what Senator Moreno was saying. Yes, you can receive ACA subsidies, but it's all based, there's a little bit of a technicality to it. It's all based on the amount of money that you bring in. So can you as a millionaire receive ACA subsidies? You can. I'll give you an example of that. So if you have $2 million in assets, but your total income is only about $40,000, then you're going to get a good chunk when it comes to ACA subsidies. So I think this is something that needs to be addressed by the politicians, right? The fact that there is no cap is the majority of the problem. They need to put a cap on who receives the ACA subsidies. Just like any program in the United States, there's fraud everywhere. There's fraud everywhere. And we need to cut the fraud as much as we can, because the more fraud exists within these social service programs, the more money we're going to have to pay out as taxpayers. But you know what? Despite the fact that the Republicans refuted what Chuck Schumer said, I still have to agree with the Democrats. If you think about this, it's costing the United States of America, according to the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, about $2.4 billion per day to have the government shut down. We're talking about tourism. We're talking about tax revenue that comes in from payroll taxes. I want you guys to think about this through a simple mathematical equation. If we're losing $2.4 billion per day, now I've got to admit, a lot of that money is recouped in the end, right? Because if you get paid, if you're furloughed right now and you get back pay, you're still going to get taxed on that income later on. So yes, a lot of that revenue is going to be recouped, but there's also some that will not. If it's costing us $2.4 billion per day to have the government shut down, and it's only going to cost us anywhere from $24 to $30 billion to extend the ACA subsidies for a year, what are we doing? Why aren't we extending them? Everybody gets their victory. And if Republicans are so concerned about, well, you know, all these insurance companies are going to get the money, it's only for a specific part of, you know, the American community, then no problem. Expose that. When we fund this in a couple of months, when there are a lot of people that are left out from receiving these ACA subsidies, expose that. Make it public. Say, listen, this is what the Democrats voted for. Not everybody's getting the subsidies. Expose them, and then they're going to be the ones that look bad. But in the meantime, I think that needs to be checked. When it comes to Senator Langford, a little bit of a correction there. It's not going to cost $40 billion to extend these subsidies for the next year. It's a lot less than that. I don't have the same access to the numbers that these politicians have, but the Congressional Budget Office says that it's going to cost anywhere from $24 to $30 billion to extend those subsidies all the way through 2026. Now, when it comes to the shutdown, I think there's one thing that kills Democrats. The fact that they were completely against the shutdown before previously, and that includes President Obama. Take a listen to this. This was back in 2013. This has not aged well, and it makes them look like hypocrites because if you listen to what he's saying, it sounds like the exact situation that's happening right now, except that the parties are reversed.
Think about this. Shutting down the government just because you don't like a law that was passed and found constitutional. No Congress before this one has ever in history been irresponsible enough to threaten default, to threaten an economic shutdown, to suggest America not pay its bills, just to try to blackmail a president.
But in reality, I think we all know exactly why it is that the government is still shut down. And it has to do with the president, right? The president wields tremendous power. This is unlike any other president in the history of our country. This party is pretty much MAGA. Whatever the president says is what's going to happen. And I think that's where we're running into a major issue here, because the president's ego is getting in the way of negotiations. And I think that's catastrophic for the American people. I can tell you with confidence that if the president of the United States calls Speaker Johnson and Senator Thune, I guarantee you this will all be over. The government would be reopened because the Republicans would be willing to negotiate. But as long as the president refuses to negotiate and give something to the Democrats at this point to prevent the American people from continuing to suffer, we're going to continue to suffer. Now, let me tell you why I think this is important for Republicans to negotiate. The midterms are coming up. And I know that recent losses in blue states, the excuse that they're using is, well, those are blue states anyway. You know, the results were exactly what we expected. I think they're losing touch with reality. And I think there's a lot more to it, right, than just losing in those blue states. Just to show you how out of touch they are with reality, listen to this video.
To see Zoran Mamdani win by that huge margin, what was going through your mind at that point?
Well, I thought it was disgusting. I mean, I can't, and I still find, even today, now, that I'm in disbelief that this has happened, that he has been elected mayor of the largest city in America.
And we're going to talk about Mamdani a little bit later on, but he's disgusted and cannot believe why Mamdani won. Are you serious? Are the Republicans that disconnected from the reality that's happening in the United States of America? I think they are, and I think it's going to cost them big. I think we need to talk about another topic that I think is correlated to this one that's very important as well. And I think this is going to be the difference maker in the midterms. In January, support from the Latino community for President Trump was about 48%. Right now, he's sitting at about 28%. Now, depending on which poll you look at, whether it's Pew or Gallup, that may vary by a few numbers, a few digits, but he's underwater by an excess of 20 points. Now, why is that important? That's important because the Latino vote is what pushed President Trump into office. I can tell you right now, the Latino community is having buyer's remorse when it comes to electing President Trump. And I think there's two primary reasons why they're having that buyer's remorse. So let's talk about those two reasons individually here. The first one is this.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
How many Hispanics do you think are tired of hearing that? That everybody that comes from Latin America is a rapist, a drug dealer, a terrorist, right? And some are okay. I guess they're okay. You know, as a Hispanic person, I can tell you right now, the Hispanic community is getting fed up with hearing that over and over and over again. It's not just the president that's saying it. It's a lot of people in his staff. And why is this important? Why is it important for them to stop saying that and repeating the same falsehoods when it comes to the Latino community? Because it's not true. And I'll give you some numbers to back that up. But let's talk about some of the facts, some of the numbers pertaining to everybody that comes here from Latin America. So from 2020 to 2024, everybody that was apprehended at the border, out of all of those people that were caught, only 1% of those had a criminal record. We're talking about a criminal record, for example, like re-entry into the United States, or a criminal record in the international criminal database that the government has access to. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, well, that was during the Biden era. Those numbers were probably fudged. And I agree. Those numbers were probably fudged. So let's take a look at Trump's first term and exactly where those numbers are. About 10%. So what does that tell you? That tells you that about 90% of people that come into this country do not have a criminal record. They are not rapists. They are not terrorists. And when you start listening to the Latino community, and a lot of them have relatives that came in when the border was open, right? The border was open. So a lot of these people that came in, and they're like, well, wait a second. My uncle, my aunt, my dad, my brother, my sister, they're not criminals. Why do they keep saying the same thing, that we're criminals, right? Eventually, people are going to start listening to that and start saying, well, he's got something against the Latino community. And that's a terrible move. They need to move away from that rhetoric. So let me tell you another reason that I think is very important to this first one that I spoke about that's very closely correlated as well. So when it comes to this government shutdown, Latinos are deeply impacted. I could tell you that right now. I know a lot of people who are struggling right now based on what's going on. I know there are a lot of people in America that say, well, wait a second, they're struggling because they're not working as they should be working, right? They should be working more. They should be getting good jobs. Well, that's pretty hard to do. If you talk about 100 people that come here from Latin America, only about 20% have college degrees, only about 20%. From those 20%, right, from that 20% or from that 100 people, only about 5 or 6 have college degrees that are transferable. So what does that mean? That means that they are working 2 to 3 jobs sometimes just to make ends meet, which is one of the reasons I created this channel. It's for people who don't necessarily have time to read up on the news, but want to keep themselves informed. That also means that these are the people that are relying on SNAP, which has now been cut off. 25% of the people that are on SNAP are Latinos. So if they're going through it right now, what do you think is in their mind? They're looking for reprieve. They're looking for something to help them out. And when you're in a desperate situation, especially when it comes to feeding your family, you're willing to do whatever it takes to make it happen, right? So you start listening to people that are promising you things that may not necessarily be true, but damn, if they are true or anywhere near being true, I'm going to take a chance and I'm going to vote just to see if it's true and I can get a little bit of reprieve. Now, I've got to be honest with you. SNAP is a program that needs to be overhauled. It needs to be overhauled. The amount of corruption, the amount of fraud that exists within the SNAP program is pretty big. Now, it's been reduced dramatically over the last 10 years, but it still exists. I think every Hispanic person knows somebody that receives SNAP, sells the benefits, goes back to Latin America, gets all this work done, cosmetic surgery, comes back, continues to receive benefits as if they needed them. And I think those types of actions, those types of things need to be addressed immediately, because the people that need SNAP should be getting it. The people that don't need it should not be getting it. There are a lot of people that are wondering why Mamdani got elected in New York City. Well, how did this guy, a socialist, get elected in New York City? Forget about the fact that it's a blue state. The issue and the reason why he got elected is because of what's happening with the economy right now. We are continuing to get bamboozled by the Republicans saying that prices are low, that gases are at a 20-year low. Take a look at this diagram. Take a look at this chart, and you tell me if gas prices are low. Gas prices are almost exactly where they were about a year ago. And as I mentioned before, energy drives everything. I think if the Republicans don't get their heads out of their butts, they're going to end up losing the midterms. I can tell you that right now. Now, I think Chris Cuomo did a really good job in explaining exactly what's happening within the Democratic Party. And I think this movement is just starting. I think the Democrats are gaining momentum. And I think Mamdani is leading the charge on that. Listen to what Chris Cuomo said about that.
Now, both MAGA and MEGA, a bigger version of it, chose unconventional mascots, outsiders with more personality than political pedigree who could promise everything because they had a record of nothing to judge the promises against. And both spout extreme and divisive things to blame what is actually wrong, they're right about that, on common enemies of the other side and the system, demanding big changes that likely won't happen. Sounds familiar, right?
So a lot of promises were made by President Trump in his first term because he didn't understand how government really functioned. Now his promises on the second term were a little bit different and they were more tempered. But if you listen to Mamdani, he's making a lot of promises based on what he believes he can accomplish. But can he actually accomplish what he's promising the people of New York City that he's going to do? So let's talk about some of his policies and whether he can unilaterally make these things happen on his own. Now, I lived in New York in the early 80s. That's when I moved to the United States from the Dominican Republic. And I can tell you back then, things were very different. The streets were filthy. The mafia was very active. Then came Giuliani. He absolutely cleaned the city out and started a process to where New York became what it is today. Now, the problems that New York has are completely different, right? It is crime-ridden. It's become a safe zone for criminals and a lot of illegal aliens that know that ICE is not necessarily going to find them as easily there as they would in a red state. And the rich have taken over and made New York unaffordable. Gentrification is real in New York City. It is very expensive to live there. If you talk about the average rent in New York, we're talking about around $3,700. That's to get a little studio somewhere in the city. If you talk about living in Manhattan, you're talking about almost $6,000 per month in rent. And that's a problem because a lot of people in New York are struggling right now to make ends meet, given the fact that they're not even receiving SNAP. But let's take a look at some of Mamdani's promised policies, right? Let's look at city-owned grocery stores. Can those be done? There's a couple of different places where those have already been done. And they've worked, and the reviews have been mixed depending on location, depending on funding, depending on the accessibility for people. That can be done through city procurement of land and then having people that work for the city man the grocery stores. That can be done. He can do that unilaterally without any type of approval. When it comes to reorganizing the different departments within the city, that is also within his power. When it comes to other city-targeted programs, he has the ability to do pretty much anything that he wants within the city, and that's also within his power. So all in all, about 30-40% of his policies can be done unilaterally on his own without any type of state funding or state authority. However, let's talk about some of the big policy promises that he made, like free bus service. He can't do that. He can't do that on his own. And that's because the transit authority is state controlled. And in order to do that, he's going to have to reach up to the governor and they're going to have to work something out. Another thing that he's talked about doing is raising the city minimum wage. That's another thing that he cannot do unilaterally either, because you cannot exceed state minimum wages. When it comes to free universal health care, there's no way that that's going to be possible with the city funding alone. He's going to need state support for that as well. And there's aspects of the legislature that need to be approved as well. Another thing that he spoke about was tax increases for the rich. Another thing that he cannot do. Right? You cannot just impose more taxes on the rich. That's something that needs state approval as well. When it comes to the rent freeze, which I think is something that definitely needs to happen in New York because the rent is out of control, he's also going to need some type of state level authority to do that as well, because there's state minimums, there's state maximums, and he can't exceed those. So that's something that he's going to have to reach up to the state as well and try to get done. Now, let's be honest, it's a blue state. So a lot of these he may get approval for. You never know. But saying that he can unilaterally do a lot of these things is absolutely false, and it's not true. He can't do that. So in total, about 60 to 70% of his agenda is going to require him to reach up to the state in order to get it done. But I'll tell you, a lot of these things are a possibility. People are struggling, not just in New York City, but in New York State. And since the state is blue, he can get some of these things done. So I'll give you my honest opinion. I think Mamdani is going to continue to move up the Democratic Party. But I'll be honest with you, if he wasn't necessarily a socialist, if he was a more moderate Democrat with the way that he speaks as an eloquent speaker.
I'm so happy to be here in Puerto Rico. And, that question was asked of me of where I would go outside of the country. And I'm happy to be here at Somos. And I'm happy also to be here because you cannot tell the story of New York City without telling the story of Puerto Rico. And even just going to that parade and Puerto Rico no se vende, the chants, the convictions of so many of a life of decency. And it's been a joy to be here. I'm proud to report that in the few hours I've been here, I've already had some mofongo, and it's great.
If Mamdani was born here and he was more of a moderate instead of a democratic socialist, I think the Republicans would be in trouble, because he reminds me of a President Obama in his day. He's engaging, he's energetic, and he can convince people to believe him whether he's telling the truth or not. So the second reason that President Trump got elected by Latinos was immigration. What's happening now with immigration is the fact that the liberal media is utilizing a lot of different circumstances and a lot of instances of ICE taking people into custody. The tactics that ICE is using are very, very aggressive. And the liberal media, the Democrats, are gravitating towards a lot of these instances where they are taking people in and they are sensationalizing all of these different incidences. One of those that's pretty important to highlight is when that preschool teacher was taken into custody. They didn't give you the whole context of what happened. So what we heard about this preschool teacher was that she was drug out of her daycare in front of, her kids who were yelling and screaming. But what they left out were the details that led up to that. So listen to this.
In a statement, the Department of Homeland Security said officers attempted to conduct a targeted traffic stop, but the male driver and female passenger ran into a daycare and attempted to barricade themselves inside.
I've mentioned this before. I think they need to publish those numbers of the arrests that they make for people to be deported more often than every quarter. I think those need to be posted probably every week, maybe 2 weeks. But above all of that, I think they need to wear body cams. I'm all for them wearing masks and protecting their families, prevent being doxxed. I'm all for that. But when it comes to their actions, there's a very easy way to validate their actions. Wear body cams. And body cams aren't just for the protection of the people that are being arrested, getting ready to be deported. These are also for the officers themselves. these body cams would help alleviate a lot of the sensationalism that's all around these ICE detentions. So now let's move on to Venezuela. Venezuela continues to be a sticking point in foreign policy for the United States. And that's because there's been a little bit of a development. So Russia is now aiding Venezuela. Venezuela is now colluding with Russia, China, Iran. Now let's be honest here. We know exactly what this is. This is Russia understanding that we are helping the Ukraine fight them over there. It's a proxy war. Russia's just looking to engage in the same thing against the United States of America. The difference is Ukraine is inflicting tremendous damage on Russia's military, on Russia's economy. Venezuela has no ability to do that to the United States of America. Russia can give them whatever they want. The change of command in Venezuela is inevitable. It's going to happen. Maduro will be out of power. The opposition will be in power. Now, like I've told you guys before, there is an economic aspect to that, right? 300 billion barrels of oil would be great for the United States. Now, we're not obviously going to take all that oil. The opposition would open the floodgates when it comes to pushing a lot of that petroleum to come into the United States. And that would significantly reduce our energy prices. But more importantly, I think that would make Venezuela one of the richest countries in the Western Hemisphere. Imagine the riches. Imagine what they could do to their infrastructure. Imagine what they can do to bring the Venezuelan people out of the misery that they're living in right now, simply because Maduro is in power. But as the United States looks to project power, the bickering in D.C. continues. Now they are trying to restrict presidential power to strike all the drug boats that are coming into this country.
Never in the history of our country has a Congress terminated a military action because they did not give permission to the commander-in-chief. Never in the history of the country the Supreme Court ruled that the Congress has the power to terminate hostilities simply because they disagree with the president. Because today that becomes the norm, then you've taken the power of the commander-in-chief away from the president, you conferred it upon us.
On this vote, the yeas are 49, the nays are 51, and the motion is not agreed to.
The message all of us should send to the President of the United States is quit engaging in illegal actions in the Caribbean and international waters, blowing up boats and people in an extrajudicial fashion. And when it comes to Venezuela, stop making these threats and amassing military assets off the shore and claiming you somehow have the authority to do that.
I think what Senator Hawley needs to understand is that the president has the every right to do that. Presidents before him have done it. They have struck different places all around the world. All we're doing is taking out these drug boats. Now the argument continues. Well, how do we know that these are drug boats? We know they're drug boats. The intelligence is clear. And if you see in some of these videos, the image is clear. You can see what it is that they're carrying on these drug boats. I'll continue to reiterate that there is protocol that we follow. There are lawyers there that authorize these strikes. They look at the legality of the strike to ensure we aren't breaking laws. And there's a whole kill chain of people that authorize the strike. Maduro just needs to take his losses. Look, the United States of America is projecting power in a very strong way in Venezuela. Is it overkill? Yeah, I think it's a little bit overkill. I don't think we need to have that many assets there. But, you know, there are some people within the military in Venezuela that think they actually have a chance against the United States. Just listen to this video.
This morning, a new warning from Venezuela's government saying that they are prepared for any attack from the United States.
I'm speaking to the imperialists of the North. We're getting ready, and we will fight if you dare set foot in Venezuela. We're watching events around the world.
Tensions in the Caribbean have escalated after the United States deployed warships near the coast of Venezuela last month, which Washington describes as part of its strategy to fight the international drug cartels. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro calls the U.S. buildup as a pretext for invasion. The U.S. government has not signaled any planned land invasion by the thousands of service members being deployed.
You know, when it comes to Venezuela, I'll tell you the same thing that I've said before. Maduro needs to take the money that he's stolen from the Venezuelan people, and he needs to just leave, because the change of command, the change of power in Venezuela is inevitable. It's going to happen. Give way for the opposition to go in there and make Venezuela one of the richest countries in the Western Hemisphere. If you like the video, make sure you guys subscribe, turn on the notifications, and until next time, stay balanced.